Hello and welcome to the Ireland on the Fly podcast about the people and places of fly fishing in Ireland. This week's guest is Garrett Fallon, someone who grew up in Ireland fishing the Boyne, Corrib, Deel and other rivers and lakes around the country. But since the 1990s, he has been in England working in publishing and design. The last few years, however, has seen him combine his love of fishing, writing and publishing to create the very popular fishing quarterly magazine called Fallon's Angler, which is dedicated to long-form writing about every type of angling, with the likes of Chris Yates and Kevin Parr featuring in each issue. Garrett is also the son of Niall Fallon, an Irish Times journalist who wrote the well-respected Fly Fishing for Irish Trout in 1983, and we speak to Garrett about his father's influence growing up and his own memories of fishing in Ireland. And Tom, before we hear from Garrett, it's a fascinating interview as he's someone who has, I suppose, really approached angling from the question of why rather than just the how.
Yeah, it was really great to talk to him. And you said his approach to it is fantastic. I was really looking forward to this initially because one of the first books I read was his father's book, Niall Fallon's book. But it was funny, and that's how we go into that as well. That was fascinating. But to hear him talk and his approach to it, but also as well for somebody, and I really admire this, you can sense it, he's gotten to do something that he wants to do. And he stood back and he said, yeah, no, I really enjoy this. And this comes across. He the passion he has for, as he says, reading things that come to life for him. This was amazing, and this is what he wants to do. I said, fair play to you. You're doing what you want to do, and he's so enthused about it. And from something else, it's not just somebody who's, let's say, decided to go fishing. Like somebody could say to me, oh, you've decided to go fishing. But no, he's approached another side of it, a side that he loves, the whole literature side of it, the whole thing about angling, of what he gets from angling. And he's getting other people to put that forward as well. I thought brilliant, really good.
And it's funny actually, because if you think, because I was thinking about actually, like if you think about a lot of the interviews say that we might do, they're with guides, like yourself or, people, who are competition anglers, people who have dedicated a significant part of their life to fishing and, maybe have earned money to, it might necessarily be full-time, but it's a central part of their life. Whereas, Garrett and, somebody like myself, it's angling's not. But there's a love of it. And what I love about what Garrett has done is that he was able to bring that love of it through another way, i.e. the writing. But it's funny. I actually think you'll hear it in the interview when he talks about his father, because we asked him quite a lot about his father, Niall, because he was obviously so well known for the fly fishing in Ireland. And there's a beautiful line he says at the end about his father that they found the papers, drafts of novels and short stories that his father had written, never published them. And I asked him about, was he an angler or a writer? And he says he was probably a writer first and foremost, and that just came through in the angling. And I actually got that with Garrett. I thought I really got that sense of, here was somebody, he worked in publishing, design, fishing was just a constant in his life. That he was able to bring this out then through the writing of Fallon's Angler. And it's testament to his love of both. I think that, like you said, shines through, and it was the passion for it. But I think it's something deeper. I was talking about, I like Haunted by Water is my book. It just reminded me, Garrett kind of approached it, and I really identified it when I was chatting to Garrett.
I could see that where you were talking. It was like, I was listening to Kindred Spirits.
Yes, that's
right. Yeah, very much so. For that, I was sitting back and I was, because the two of you were completely engrossed, because it's something that really gets both of you going. The chance, because you write, but you're writing about fishing and what it does for you. Yeah. Not the actual technicalities of it, but what it does for you, what it does for the soul, or what you get from it.
Yeah, that was it exactly. And that's I'm a big fan of Fallon's Angler, the quarterly. And I'd recommend if anybody you're into the kind of longer form type writing, and it's not fly fishing, it covers every type of fishing.
That's the interesting thing, which I think is good. I think it's really good. I mean, like we were talking earlier on there about the old Irish Angler. I don't know when we were talking about it. And the nice thing about the Irish Angler when it was being produced was it wasn't just fly fishing. So if you were fly fishing, you got to read a bit about other things, things like sea fishing, shore fishing, coarse fishing, the pike fishing. It was great. It was nice like that. And I think that comes across with what Gareth is doing as well.
Yeah, no, it is. You summed it well. Kindred spirits. There was something there. Like I just kind of.
Oh, definitely. I just stood back. I just about let him off. It was great. It was great. I was loving it.
Well, I hope people get a sense of, and even if you're not as into it, I do hope the kind of passion comes through because people get into it.
It's interesting. I meant to say it too, Garrett, and you just brought it up there when we were talking to him. It's funny. Niall definitely was a writer first, because I read the book when we were going. When I was where this, I opened the book again and I read it, and it's the way he's formatted the book. There's a lot of technical information in it, and there's chapters of what you need and what you do. And I get the sense, and because I read it in secondary school, I lapsed those bits up because I wanted to know what I needed. What was the nylon I needed? What else did I need? What did I do? But now that I read it now, I get the sense that Niall didn't really want to write about that. But it was sort of somebody said, what you should do? Put in a bit about what you need. But he put it in, and he did a good job in it. But the bits that he, and they come across, it's like the bit you read about when he catches the big fish.
Yes.
When the words start flowing.
And you can hear the publisher going, no, cut, more on the nylon, please.
Yes. Tippet diameter. We need to know about tippet diameter.
Forget about that poetic nonsense. None of those anglers are into that. And actually, just before we hear from Garrett on that, you'll hear him, we mentioned a bit, Niall mentioned recordings of tapes with gillies from Connemara. And we mentioned in the interview, I've subsequently followed it up with Garrett, and he says he thinks there might be a drawer full of these tapes back in the old home back in Ireland. So hopefully, next time he's over, he's going to have a look. So, I want first dibs on that, Garrett, if you're listening.
Jeez, that could be so good. That'd be brilliant.
Wouldn't it be a gold mine?
Yeah.
So we'll wait for that one. But look, you get to hear Garrett's story and also about his father, Niall, and his memories of Ireland. And like I said, hopefully, you get that sense of kind of what fishing means to him and how that's combined with his love of writing and how he's come to establish and set up the very popular Fallon's Angler magazine. So here is Garrett Fallon.
My first home was on Loch Corrib, on the shores of Loch Corrib in Oughterard, where my father had a boat. But I barely remember that. I have some sort of old dreams about sort of very sort of wide open spaces and dog kennels, weirdly, because we also ran a dog kennels when we were there. And so I just got these sort of echoes of boats and the loch in the background. And we returned there many times over the years. But from there, we'd actually moved to Kildare, and then from Kildare to County Meath. And it was County Meath where I kind of settled, and my family home is still there. So we were brought up on the banks of the River Deel, which is a beautiful limestone stream that flows into the River Boyne, and the River Boyne sort of also flows around the back of the fields. And kind of in between all of that, there's the Royal Canal, and there's a lake and various other things with great access to sort of the Westmead Lakes as well. So I just remember my dad, like he kind of had an arrangement with my mum. My mum was like, we had 4 acres of fields at the back, and she was allowed to ride the horses, and my father was allowed to fish, and neither of them crossed over. So
secret to a happy marriage.
Yeah, exactly. Secret to a happy marriage. Yeah. So we spent an awful lot of time, roaming the fields ourselves, but our parents were off doing their own kind of things, which was kind of fantastic in many ways. But
so did you grow up with fishing then? Was it just
part of absolutely life? Yeah. My dad was fishing for him was you could kind of tell his mood, because he was a very kind of busy guy, and when he was really stressed, he would go off on his own up the river, and so he would literally walk out of the house sort of 250, 300 meters up to the Deel, and he'd fish there. And if the fishing that would be just a sort of short jaunt, and they're fantastic wild brown trout there, absolutely beautiful fish. And we used to see sort of salmon runs and elder runs up the weir and stuff like that. And but then if he would go sort of further afield as well, there was some fantastic fishing on the Deel and the Boyne. So when he kind of had more time for himself, he might do a wider trip. But the Deel was always kind of his first port of call. And then occasionally he would get us involved, when he had a little bit more time. But generally it was a kind of it was something he did to kind of, I don't know, to keep his mind in the right kind of place and just to find that kind of personal space that we all kind of need.
What did he do actually? What did he do, Garrett?
Well, he was a journalist, so he worked for the Irish Times, and I think at one point he was editor for special reports and as well as editor for tourism. So, but he traveled the world. I remember him sort of going away for sort of several weeks at a time and coming back with quite exotic gifts. At the time, I thought they were exotic, but invariably they'd be some coins from somewhere. And of course, the coins would have a hole in them. And I think this is the best thing since sliced bread. But actually, it was just a change from the bottom of his pocket, And or there might be something else like that. There'd be a sort of an Indian sword or a Texas. I remember he brought a sort of. I remember him go to Cuba actually and bringing back a stuffed frog. And a sort of sugarcane machete and various other kind of things, But I think that the thing he was most famous for was he was one of the first. I think he was the first Western journalist to go into Cambodia after it was occupied by the Khmer Rouge, and he was there for I think a couple of weeks, and then this is the time before mobile phones, and my mum went to Dublin Airport to pick him up, and he wasn't on the flight. And so she was a bit frantic and rang the Irish Times. And I don't know whether it was Douglas Gageby at the time who was editor. It might well have been, because this was sometime in the early 1970s. And they said, well, it appears that he wasn't on the flight. So it was like, we're frantically kind of trying to find out where he was. And it turned out that he and the photographer he was with were invited, in inverted commas, to stay a while in the Khmer Rouge camp. And so they did. So they stayed there until they were told that they didn't have to stay there anymore. And so it was a little bit longer, like a week or two, whatever. And then he came back and with sort of a lot of stories and about how the Khmer Rouge camp was run. And, I remember seeing pictures of him. I used to have them up on my wall of him with sort of holding an AK-47 in his hand while there was a whole group of kind of young lads, ranging from, 20s down into basically 7 or 8 holding bazookas, rifles, automatic machine guns, you name it. Of course, I thought this was fantastic, but actually, when later on, I also found the pictures of the bodies of the dead that they'd had to photograph as well. So it was a kind of wake up call, and I kind of realized that okay, this is why a man needs to go fishing. When he sees that, and that's part of his job. Which obviously is not doing that all the time, but to see that at all would mean that plenty of time on the bank is needed to kind of get your head around it. So I kind of understood from that moment why he did like to spend a bit of time away on his own.
And did you grow up then, like just with worms or whatever, like just on the riverbank, yourself, just
yeah, I did, because there were perch in the Deel. And there was a lovely old sort of stone bridge on this avenue up to the manor. We were the lodge to a manor, and we were unusual. There was an unusual lodge in that it wasn't inside the gates, wasn't a typical gate lodge, but it was built as a hunting lodge, a hunting and fishing lodge. And so we used to just literally walk across the road and up through the gates and along the avenue, and then was the bridge there and a weir just above the bridge, and you could fish into the weir, in the fast water occasionally, and you might get a trout or whatever like that. But generally the bridge was where you would fish, and you'd catch eels, gudgeon, perch, always kind of small perch. And then occasionally there'd be a big trout. And then depending on the kind of time of year, you'd always kind of put your head over the sort of the side of the bridge and look down, because there was always one side that was in shade and one side that was in sun. You know what it is? And there's always, it's one of those sort of bridges with 2 arches to it. And and the sort of the water surges through one arch and goes very sort of slowly through the other, so you get this mix of water, And I remember one of my mates come running down into the house and saying, "You've got to see this." Come up to the bridge, and I did, and there were 2 massive salmon. I mean, they were enormous things, and where we would normally catch perch. But yeah, but that was where my dad brought me there, because he could see that me and my friends were sort of. We were kind of trying to get our heads around fishing, and we were probably, 7 or 8 or whatever. And he just brought me up one night with a rod, a hook, a worm, a weight on the hook, and that was it, and I caught this thing. Thought it was, absolutely fantastic. And then one of its spines stuck in my fingers, and that was kind of it, but that was just the beginning of it. So once I kind of, knew how to do that, then I was just off. I think I used an old, boat fishing rod, like a seaboat fishing rod, and really thick line and whatever. I mean, my friends and I would cobble stuff together and just go around and explore. But yeah, generally it was perch and worm, and then it graduated from there to probably spinning, and then onto the fly. He used to take us. Obviously, fly fishing was a bit different because it was super skillful, compared to us, like literally sitting there with just feeling the line in your fingers. But fly fishing it seemed like quite a hard thing to do. But he started us off by taking us to the lakes, like somewhere like Mount Dalton, I remember going to, and we'd trail sort of teams of wet flies behind the boat, and he'd row up and down this lake, and we'd catch a little trout. But it probably wasn't until, I'm trying to think what the first time I cast a fly was probably, probably one of the Westmead lakes, like the White Lake, probably, or Loch Boyne, probably for trout from a boat, or actually it probably started off from the bank. We used to go for barbecues with sort of multiple families.
He seemed to like the White Lake, did he?
Yeah, he did.
In the book, he talks a lot about it.
He was very fond of it. Yeah, he did. Yeah,
he doesn't let it out, a bit like An Angler's Paradise, F.D. Barker, because he actually he doesn't say where he caught the biggest fish. The other one he has on the front page, the 6 pound 8 ounce that he caught on a sedge in an evening. But if you read the piece about it, which I did quite often, actually, loads of times, he says like that he's with a guy called Murroch, fishing with a guy called Murroch.
Yeah, which is
named.
Aptly named, exactly. Yeah.
And he says the only hint that you get is up until they had that fish, their only sport of the day is a poorly conditioned rainbow. So I'm there putting 2 and 2 together and goes, it's got to be the White Lake. It's got to be the White Lake. So I don't know. So was it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I believe so. Yeah. So I remember coming back that night, and
I do.
Yeah, and because it was quite late, obviously, because he caught that fish in almost total darkness. Like he blind cast to a feeding fish, I think, as he put it himself. He heard the slurp, and then he just struck, and the next thing you know is the boat's been towed. Like whether that was a bit of journalistic sort of license, I don't know, but
it reads good.
It reads good, yeah. But I remember he actually came home with 2 fish that night, and like what happens generally in the house, that you drive across the cattle grid, so that'll be the first thing that kind of wake you up, is the car coming across the cattle grid, and then into the gravel, and then grinding to a sort of halt, and this halt was like a little bit skiddy, and I kind of thinking, oh, something's going on, what's happened, and it was just a kind of like a, there was a bit of sort of, I don't know, there was a bit of speed in the walking, and he kind of got into the house, and the back door was like adjacent to myself and my brother's room, and we could hear the chatting in the kitchen, and him talking to my mother. And I came out of the room, and I went in, and there were these 2 trout in papers, and one was, I think probably the poorly conditioned rainbow, whatever.
Yeah.
But the other one was massive. Yeah. And I think at that stage he was already on a second glass of wine. So I got the full story. But yeah, it was a beautiful fish, and it's stuffed, and sort of mounted in our house, in our family home.
It's still there, yeah.
Still there. I read that? Actually, I have it. I might read the paragraph or two.
Please do, yeah.
I have it here. So he's talking about Murroch fumbled forward, and the beam of his torch lit the water. The bottom sprang up as though looked at through the bottom of a glass. We were in no more than a foot of water and almost aground. Then there swam deliberately into the circle of bright light a great silvered shape, the eyes bright as diamonds. In the calm water and the torch's sharp light, I could see the slender hold of the fly. My heart failed me. It must be now or not at all. I put side pressure on the fish, and she moved reluctantly to the side of the boat. Murroch put the net under her in the torchlight and lifted her great bulk inboard. As he did so, the net bent and the fly fell out, but she was landed. And my old Hardy scale, as accurate as any computer, put her at 6 pounds and 8 ounces. My biggest then and still.
Nah.
Yeah, it's great writing. And just in case people are wondering, sorry, it's Fly Fishing for Irish Trout by Niall Fallon. I got it on, I think it was A-Books or Amazon. You can still get it. It's a fantastic read. I was just looking there as well, Garrett. It was first published in 1983, and this is the edition 1986. But like, you know, there's brown trout in lakes, brown trout in rivers. What I actually liked, Garrett, is even just the opening chapter. He talks about the changing scene, and I did have a question for you, and actually, I have the page marked.
Right.
Actually, I was going to ask you. This might be for another time, though, or even. Your dad writes in it. I have in my desk tape recordings of several of the great gillies of the Western lakes. One long since dead recalls the capture in 1 week of 2 trout to his rod. The one weighing 21 pounds, the second close on 24 pounds. They were, he said, caught on fly. You don't have those tapes anymore, do you? I would love to hear those tapes.
So I'd forgotten that piece, but I remember it. Yeah.
Now that would make a podcast.
Oh yeah.
I'll tell you what, I can have a look for them. My mother doesn't throw anything away, so a lot of his stuff is still around. He was supposed to be kind of, working on another book, which I've looked extensively for, and I never managed to find it. But I haven't had a huge amount of access to his personal stuff. But I think with permission from my mum, I might be able to have a rummage around. There's a lot of things knocking around, in sort of boxes and drawers, mostly drawers. Like I had a lot of drawers.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is with fly fishermen and fishermen full stop, but fly fishermen especially. There's an awful lot of drawers around, with stuff in them. And so yeah, I think there are tapes, but I hadn't actually. It's a long time since I read the book, and I'd forgotten about those.
Yeah,
so that gives me something to do.
Excuse to do it. But it's funny, actually. Myself and Tom were talking, and what I love about kind of the book is it's the kind of link to the past as well. So whether it was the tapes or even, Tom, you were mentioning the bibliography, the kind of mentioning the books or the tackle shops.
Yeah, some of the books, the list he's had. I mean, there's books there that I hadn't heard of, and I'm quite good. Well, I won't say I'm quite good, but I would have looked up a lot of things. I've actually gone to the National Library and I took out Belton's book, which was written in 1834. I went to the National Library to get it out, to get a paragraph from it.
Right.
So I was looking through the bibliography again, and there's a couple there. I said, "Oh God, I don't know that one." Off to the library again.
Yeah, well, I think Tom Ford tells a great story about my dad being, in sort of, heavy competition against this other book collector in Ireland. And I don't know who this person was, I've never found out. But he'd be infuriated. They go to a lot of sort of house clearances. And at that time in the 1980s, 1990s, not the 70s, 80s, and 90s, you were getting a lot of house clearances, as sort of old sort of families passed away, and people didn't understand really what the books were worth, and sometimes at the time they probably weren't worth a lot at all. It wasn't until later that they were probably worth something. But he would just, he kind of knew, and he would buy them, and there were books coming in and out of the house all the time. And he would talk to Tom Ford, like, as soon as he came back from a house clearance or whatever, or an auction, and he'll say, "Oh, I have this book," and Tom would go, "Oh, I've got a copy of that." I said, "Oh, all right, okay. Well, I've got this book today. I've got a copy of that," And so I got this book. "Oh, I don't have a copy of that." Or Tom would ring him and say, I've seen a copy of this. Do you have it? And they do kind of swap. But then, invariably, sort of once every few months, you go, "I was at that auction, and that fellow was there, and he got the book that I wanted." The F and so and so. So, but I never found out who that man was. But he had quite an extensive library. A lot of which I now have. I've got some of the books behind me. Some of the sort of less valuable ones are here, and a few others are in my house, but the rest are all in kind of safekeeping.
Can I ask you, Garrett, just in terms of when did your dad die?
Oh, he died. Well, when I turned 51, he was dead longer than he was alive in my life. So it's 26 years ago he died.
Late 90s.
Yeah.
Was he? obviously because he's such a great journalistic career, the Irish Times, and you mentioned Cambodia and the kind of special reports and stuff. But yet, I don't know. Well, maybe it's just the space I occupy. He's associated so much with the fly fishing of Ireland. What way do you think he want to have been remembered, for his journalism work, or both, or what way do you think would have been?
It's a really interesting point. I wish I had a chance to sort of to ask him, but I think for both, really. Like, I think first and foremost, I felt that he was a journalist, but actually that's what I thought when I was a kid. I thought that, he was a fisherman after that. But actually, as I've got older, I think that probably the two things kind of switch around.
Right.
I think that he's having found some of the, he wrote 22 short stories which have never been published, which I have.
Wow.
And they're about sort of a mix. They're about sort of a whole, cross section of kind of Irish life in sort of 70s and 80s. And actually, it kind of made me think that really, underneath it all, he was a writer. I think so. The journalism kind of happened as a sort of necessity, maybe to
pay the bills.
To pay the bills, and actually, and my mother. In fact, I was just talking to my mother recently. She was saying that she's found, like, he wrote a novel. He wrote plays, poems, all sorts of stuff. So I think he was a writer, and I think if he wanted to write about anything, more than anything else, it was probably about fishing. Though he didn't do nearly enough of that. He did a lot of fishing, but but not enough writing about it.
Was he proud of fly fishing for Irish Trout?
Yeah, he was. But he was. And the person who would tell me that would be Tom Fort again, because Tom and him were absolutely great friends. Tom, Matthew, and Stephen. And all of that, three Fort brothers, and then the friend Stephen. And Tom would say that he was a fierce self-critic, as well as being, he didn't give praise easily, for other people. So if he didn't give praise easily, he probably wasn't too, self-praising. But actually, I think he was proud of it, because I think that the proof is kind of in the pudding, isn't it? So I think that when people write you letters to say thanks, that I managed to catch a trout on that piece of advice, and that's kind of enough, isn't it? You're doing something right.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I'd highly recommend it for anybody to check it out online and to get a secondhand copy of it. It is a great read, absolutely. Like, I want to fast forward years and decades. We'll do a quick fast forward. How does the boy who is fishing the Deel, you end up in London, and in a midlife crisis or a later life crisis, you end up setting up a fishing magazine? Fill in the blanks.
Well, the fishing magazine started actually when I was when my dad was still alive. I was working in advertising and in Dublin, and then I was designing as well. I'd been to art college, and actually I went from advertising to art college and back to sort of design, and I was like, I just had this, my father had sort of ignited this kind of passion in me. I became ill when I was in my sort of 20s, and for a summer I had to move back home, and my dad basically nursed me, by bringing me to the canal and kind of leaving me there, and I could barely walk, but he would leave me for, an hour, and I had my old rod from when I was a kid, and I would fish. And I would catch rudd. The Royal Canal was full of rudd at the time.
And had you fished before? Like, had you let it go during your 20s?
I let it go when I'd fished extensively up to about the time I was about 15, and I went away to boarding school, and then I didn't fish for a couple of years until a couple of lads from Boyne joined that school, and we started pike fishing again. And an actual fact, a bunch of us went home from school one weekend, and one of my mates caught a 10-pound salmon in the Boyne on a spinner, and and it was that was a great day. But from there I kept on fishing. So I'd only had a couple of years, out of it, and then it was when Passion for Angling came out, and I watched that with my dad, and he introduced me to the writing Chris Yates and all that kind of stuff, and I thought, I've got to do something like that. This is amazing. So I looked into it at the time, and then college went on, and then my father passed away, and then I was drifting for a little bit. It was my uncle Porrick, my father's youngest brother, who invited me over to London, and and then just, you know, work took over. I was been working in magazine publishing, you know, from 27 up until I'm still doing it. So yeah, after a while, it just became like, what am I doing? You know, like I'm sort of working in magazines that are about economics and about banking and, you know, about, you know, offshore hedge funds and, you know, well, okay, great, fantastic, but I wanted to do something else. So that itch was still there, and yeah, it was 2014. I kind of went like, I need to have a kind of creative side to me, even though I was creating in my professional world, but I wasn't creating anything I was necessarily particularly proud of, and it was just paying the bills, and so
similar to your dad, actually. You know, in terms of your dad was doing the journalism, like, and he was doing the writing on the side.
Yeah, there's definitely kind of symmetry to it. You know, I think one of the things that sort of prompted me to do it as well was my uncle Parr, you know, who I was very, very close to. Like he would take me salmon fishing, you know, up to Scotland. You know, in fact, the year that my dad died, I went. My father and mother would go every year with my uncle Porrick up to the Conan in Scotland, or the Naver, or somewhere like that. And the year he died, obviously Dad couldn't go, so I went in his stead. And that was the first time I really kind of met my uncle properly. You know, I'd met him obviously a few times, but I really got to know him at that point, and we became very close. And I then subsequently moved over to London and lived with him for a while, and fished sort of relatively sort of regularly with him. And so he passed away. It just this kind of thing started to build where I just kind of felt that I'd sort of owed something to, you know, not just my father, but to my uncle too. And I guess to my grandfather, you know, sort of poet and writer. And I kind of felt that there was a sort of, I wanted to write more, you know. I'd written a bit in my 20s. I'd applied for a job as angling correspondent of the Irish Times, actually, and it got turned down when I was about, you know, 20 or something.
Derek Evans, damn you.
Yeah. Well, no nepotism in the Irish Times.
Yeah, actually, it couldn't have been that. No, it must have been after. Actually, that's a good point. It must have been after my dad died.
Yeah.
So I was 25. So yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think it was like, okay, I'll apply for this. Somebody said, "Oh, this job is gone." I said, "I was about a year too late, isn't it? Because we could have had a really good contract, and now he's not around." But yeah, there was no sympathy given. It was just like, "No, you're crap. Off you go." You know, so it was like, but yeah, they weren't. They, you know, I was writing, you know, in a very kind of, you know, pastoral kind of way. Yeah. I was writing about, you know, misty dawns and, you know, the magic of catching fish, rather than, you know, I went down the canal and I caught 50-pounder roach, you know.
And did that inform then Fallon's angler in that sense? Because it wasn't a how-to, and it's not even like, it's about fishing, but there's a certain philosophy and a certain mood to it, I think, is the kind of way I'd phrase it. Like,
yeah, it did, because my father had this really extensive library, but it wasn't just about Irish fishing books. It wasn't just about fly fishing. It was lots of disciplines. So whenever I became interested, like I remember reading Ken Whelan's, you know, book about coarse fishing in Ireland, and it was just, you know, I used to go into it. Whenever I wanted to go somewhere, I would read that book, but that was a very instructive book and was really, really handy, you know. And so I would read those. But then I would also read, like, when I first read Casting at the Sun by Chris Yates, it just blew me away, and that was, it just made so much sense to me, and so my angling was sort of, you know, a mixture of the two things, where, you know, you need that instructive stuff where, you know, you can learn, and you have to sort of, you have a conundrum and you want to find out, so you want to, you know, you read how somebody else has sort of dealt with this. But actually, what really spoke to me was something much more soulful, and in a sense, when the opportunity came to do it, it needed to be soulful, because that was what I was looking for. You know, the work that I was doing had a lack of soul to it. So I just found it, you know, I had this need to sort of engage with nature. I felt that sort of, it was a very kind of magical thing to do, and so the writing has just kind of evolved in that sort of sense. It's just the writing that makes more sense to me, because I think at the time as well, there was a lot of, in many ways, it was a sort of, you know, there was so many fishing magazines out, you know, around that time. sort of, early 2000s, tons of them, but actually it was the advent of kind of sponsored angling. And so very quickly, I think we realized, magazines were literally just full of tackle talk. I'm going fishing with this rod, sponsored by this manufacturer, with this reel, sponsored by this manufacturer, with this line. And it was just like, okay, all right, when are you going to actually
that doesn't happen. Oh, I couldn't. Oh, are you serious?
Yeah, and actually, believe it or not, it still happens. And the thing is, I'm all on for that, because you need your ambassadors, and you do need that. But actually, when it was all the time, I kind of felt, there's more to it than this, isn't there? And so I kind of I still read the Angling Times. So when I like the Angling Times, big fan of it. I'll go and buy a copy, and there's lots of how-to stuff and where-to stuff, and it's fantastic. But when I want to read, there was nowhere really I felt I could read, enough about just escape, where I could sit. The thing where you can just kind of sit in an airplane and you pull out a book and then suddenly you've landed, So like it's 3 hours. It's 3 hours later, and you've kind of forgotten that there's been a steward walking past offering you beer or something like that. You just totally got your head in the book, and I wanted that kind of thing from a magazine as well, where it was long form writing, where people were given enough time and space to be able to kind of get their hands into a story. And it's basically, it's at the time there wasn't an awful lot of nature in my life, and even though where I'm living now is sort of relatively leafy, I wasn't fishing enough, and actually it was a good excuse for it, get me out fishing,
Actually, it's funny. It's how I came to write my book, Haunted by Waters, because I wasn't fishing.
Yeah, great book. Yeah, love it.
And thanks a million for reviewing it. But it was, and it's funny. I won't bore you too much about it. It was my sixth book, but it was the first one I'd written that I didn't have a contract for, that I hadn't been commissioned to write, because the other ones were sports, GA, all that kind of stuff. I just wrote it for myself, but I wrote it with the point of view of it was an excuse to make me get out as well fishing. So I was booked, I would go somewhere, I'd book somewhere to do it. And, my excuse to the wife was, well, I'm going to be writing a book, But I sat down and wrote it for myself. And, and then when I was thinking of sending it off to publishers, I was like, sure, what publisher would be interested in, fly fishing around Ireland kind of thing. And I remember I sent it off to Hachette, or one of the biggest publishers, in Ireland. And they got back to me within hours. And they're like, it just struck a chord. And I think it's that when it comes from the soul, like you said, Garrett, when it comes from the heart, it resonates kind of deeper with people,
Yeah, I found that book a very kind of prescient book. It was it came at the right time.
Exactly. Yeah.
It was it really resonated with me, and obviously you talked about some places like the Suir. I mean, stories about the Suir. And the Suir was a very special river to my father, and I'd only had the pleasure of fishing it probably twice in my life. And
I actually had the pleasure of speaking to Tom Fort as well on the podcast. Year and a half ago. I think it was just at the start of the pandemic, and he was talking about the Suir, and I've been saying to him, Tom, come on, because we were able to talk about this like literally down the road from me where I go fishing, and he's like, oh yeah, I've been down there and I've got caught fish down there and everything, and I was like, right, you have to come back and we'll go fishing, and that's what I love that in terms of the 7 degrees of separation and all, like when you're talking about people, and it's amazing. I'm talking to Tom Fort in the UK, and he's fished down the road from me.
There is that, but it's part of the beauty of angling, isn't it? It's like I have. It's one of the sort of things that I hadn't realized would happen, is that I now, my social circle has grown, and I've got really, really close friends that I've met since I set up the magazine. Who I see as often as I can, and I fish with as often as I can, but not nearly enough. But it's just the magazine has put me, in contact with like-minded people, who see angling in the same way, and they can be from all over the place, not just the people you might meet on the bank yourself. And as a result of that, then you've got more opportunities to meet more people kind of like you, and not everybody's going to be exactly like you, which is you don't want people to be exactly like you. You want people to be different. You want that sort of journey through life to sort of give you opportunities to meet.
Tell me this, Garrett. how did you find it the first few years? Because obviously you were still working, you were still doing the day job, but you were putting this out. How did you find it the first few years? Was it tough in terms of, because I'm thinking in terms of digital, everybody, and I've been working in digital media for over 20 years. I've been, a proponent of digital media for that time. I did my first podcast in 2007. Yeah, eventually I get right. Like
you were about 5.
Actually, so much we actually had to call it radio because we knew if we called it a podcast, people wouldn't have a clue what we were talking about. But yeah, so how did you find that first few years? Like, did people not go, Jesus, you're mad doing that?
Oh, people said I was mad to do it from the very beginning, even before I came out with the first one. Yeah. Because I had no idea how it would go down. I thought people would just think, who's this bloody idiot, But I felt that there's an itch I wanted to scratch. There was something I wanted to tell. There was a story I wanted to tell. There was things I was interested in doing. And actually I felt that there was a need for angling to reconnect. I thought that people had, that need for, to reconnect with what's out there, and yeah, it was hard. It's never easy balancing, a magazine with a really busy career, but actually I've sort of left that, most of that career behind. I still obviously do it, but yeah, it's incredibly hard to balance those two things, but ultimately you need to make a choice. So in the last couple of years, I've decided that actually I'd rather be, fishing an awful lot, not earning a huge amount of money. Sorry, that's my next door neighbor's dog. Chasing a fox, no doubt. Yeah, I'd rather, I kind of question, like, well, why do we work sort of 50-hour weeks all the time? Why do we work 60-hour, 70-hour weeks, which is something I was doing a lot of. Life is kind of very short, and it's, and certainly my dad's death sort of made me realize that, and I kind of thought, well, try maybe working less for less, being happy with less, gives you kind of more freedom. And so that's kind of what I've been doing. And Fallon's Angler isn't something that pays me a wage. It's something I do for love. It's something that I do because I believe it's important. But it's something that I love doing.
Yeah, like so many media projects and magazines you see, and they do disappear. It's like people lose interest, or that. And I think it's interesting what you're saying in terms of it's about doing it for the purpose, the why behind it. Because if you're looking to kind of do it to go, look, I want to make money. Obviously you'd love to be doing it full time and making money out of it. But if that's the sole purpose, it becomes a very difficult aspiration. Do you think?
Yeah, I've got absolutely no intentions of stopping it. I've looked at its, evolution, and because magazine design is something I've done for a long time, and I, though we haven't necessarily changed the design of the magazine an awful lot, we've changed kind of, some of the things that are in it, and we do have some of the writers still, Chris Yates is still in there, and a few other people, but there are also lots of other types of writing in there, like we've proudly showcased a different writer, like a new writer, every single issue since the very first, and we do that, we go out and we search and we find a new writer in every single issue and publish it. And that's something I think we can be proud of. But also we kind of, I do quite a lot of work with people on their pieces, and to help, people develop. And of course, I'm no expert, but I do try to sort of help people sort of find their voice, and that journey in itself is sort of interesting because, we've worked hundreds of articles now over 26 issues, and just watching how the face of angling changes. Like even when I first did it, I was, at the time, I just sort of gotten into fishing with a split cane rod, and trotting, and Tom and I were just talking about this, just at the very beginning, and it was like, why did I not know about this when I was in Ireland? Why did I not know about trotting in Ireland? I mean, oh my God, could you imagine the carnage we could have caused on the, on the Shannon, or even the Boyne, oh my God, and I've been back and I have trotted afloat down on the Blackwater for days, and that's been fantastic. But I was very much, I had a tweed jacket on, and a cane rod, and that was my kind of thing. And then actually, a few years later, it's morphed into something else as I travel light. I've got a 1980s match rod, that is really light and is light enough to throw over a fence, because I spent a lot of time being chased by cattle. So things kind of change, and I think the writing changes with it. I think it's quite a journey, isn't it?
Well, and that's what it's about, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
the journey as opposed to the destination. Like,
I think I know so little about fishing, but compared to somebody who knows nothing about fishing, I know loads.
Yeah.
Compared to
it's all relative. But just one thing I wanted to ask you there. You said that you suddenly realized that you don't want to work 50 hours a week and you want to fish more. But what came first? Did you suddenly think that when you started fishing more, or did you think that initially that I don't want to do 50 hours a week and then start fishing? What came first? What was it the fishing that made you think that, or did you just think that as we get older, a lot of us think that anyway?
Yeah.
Was it the fishing that instilled that?
Well, that's where the midlife crisis came in. I think it was, it was the fishing, because basically, in order to do the magazine along with my work, I upped my hours. So I ended up working harder and harder and harder. But actually, what that did is it opened the door to me fishing again. And by fishing again, I realized this is what it's about, and so. Yeah, so it's a bit of a roundabout way, but yeah, it's definitely the fishing that has sort of given me the confidence to kind of go, do you know what, stop it, stop behaving like an idiot. You're going to kill yourself. I think in kind of, in many ways, I was worried about, doing what happened to my father and dropping dead in an office, when I was in my 50s, because I was working myself to the bone, and actually fishing has given me an opportunity to sort of reevaluate. And so I'm kind of fitter now in my 50s than I was in my 40s, and that's kind of getting better, but yeah, it's just being outside, being on the bank of a river, or or a canal or a lake, it's just the way forward.
It's hard to, I remember again, just at the time in book when I was doing media interviews, and I was talking to Ryan Tuberty and RTA and Matt Cooper on Today FM, and they're and in fairness to Tuberty, he does fishing, but he was like, how can you sell this to people? You tell people you go fishing or whatever, they think, I have my friends in Dublin, they play golf, and they go, so you stand in a river and you watch this line and nothing happens for most of the day. It's like, yeah, that's pretty much it. But
work on the sales pitch there.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But it was all about that when I suppose when I was trying to, he was saying how can you sell it to people? And it's like, I was trying to sell exactly what you said, Garrett. It's when you're out that it's good for the soul. It's good for the, I think I pitched it like, it's like modern meditation, in a way, in that sense, and that you're out and about. And even I wrote it in I think it was the prologue to the book, where I came back from the Blackwater. I'd been fishing for salmon. I hadn't caught anything. And my wife said to me, Jesus, it's taking years off you. You look so, just from that act of being out for a couple of hours, and, I said, oh, sure, it's like heaven. And she was like, Jesus, if I could get to heaven by driving 20 minutes down the road, I'd be there all the time. And it was only kind of and I was like, yeah, actually, that's a fair point. Why am I, you know what I mean? It's kind of like, if it means that's so much to you, why can't you, do it more and more? And I think I'm kind of similar to you, Garrett, in that sense of caught in that trap of working 50, 60 hour weeks, wanting to fish because it's good for you, not being able to, feeling bad about yourself because you can't do it, still working more, and it's kind of like you get caught in that hamster wheel.
I think we do, and I think that I think men's mental health across the board now is very much in focus for society, but I think in particular men's mental health has become much more. But we're much more able to talk about it, and I think gone fishing with Bob Mortimer and Paul Whitehead has really sort of helped open up people's eyes to the benefits of it. And actually, but loads of people I know are kind of going, well, we do that anyway, but it's funny now, it's great for other people to see why we do it. But I was kind of, in some ways, that's what I've been doing. In some ways, that's what my dad was doing. In some ways, that's what you were doing, what we all do. We've all been kind of marshalling our kind of mental health in some way by fishing, And it's just that now we're actually able, now we can talk about it. Like, you go, well, sometimes I struggle, or sometimes I don't, or sometimes I have a problem with grief, or there's a problem with a marriage, or whatever it is that guys need to talk about. But also, what I love about fishing is again, I'm going to quote one Tom Ford, because he'll like me talking about him so much. He'll say, I think he says something like in his book, The Far from Complete Angler, that anybody who says that they go fishing to think about life or about their problems or anything like that is lying, because the only thing you think about when you're fishing is fishing. And I was caught along those kind of lines, and it really made sense to me. And that in itself is meditation, because actually you're not thinking of the state of funds, you're not thinking of Boris Johnson, you're not thinking of who's winning Wimbledon, you're not thinking of where my next mortgage payment is. You're thinking about, how do I catch that trout in front of me? Or how do there's a pike under that bush, or, and occasionally it can be, wow, there's a flock of hirundines, it's amazing. Oh, there's an osprey, that'd be lucky. Or something unusual happens to snap you out of it, which is, nature throws something at you, like a kingfisher landing on the rod tip, or a vole crawling across your foot, or a cow licking your ear.
Or catching a bat.
Catching a bat, yeah, exactly, yeah. Catching a bat.
And actually, just on that, the whole thing about nature, and like I think I've said it before, in terms of you see the kids, the younger, you feel that they're losing that touch to nature, because we're all on our screens. Maybe we're a bit older, so we're kind of can remember life before the iPhones and all that. And for my kids, it's giving them the appreciation of nature. That, I can just bring them out down for a walk down the river, and, and they're looking at the same thing, but they're seeing it and starting to appreciate it. And I think, if anything, that to me is something that as a legacy to pass on, it's that kind of, that I hope we never lose it, that, but obviously a lot of kids are, but to give them that taste of nature and how important it is, like, because I do think we're losing it.
I think you're totally right. I think that we're at a real crossroads, at the moment. And I think because we all know people of, I'm a bit older than you lads, but, I know people older than me who spend an awful lot of time on social media when they should be doing better things. And I know that to a certain extent, being on social media, being on a screen is important to work and to exist and to stay in contact with your friends. But actually, we have the experience of a life, and actually we're able to make informed decisions about how we spend our time, and we are able to recognize our need for nature because we've been through it, But if you're a kid and you don't have that exposure, what do you do? How do you get somebody to sort of realize, put down the phone, or come and see the river? How do you help them on that journey? And the only way to do it is just to encourage them. Either by making them go, or which I don't know. Yeah. Like Tom, do you bring young people fishing?
The young people I would bring fishing would be kids. Yeah. Kids of clients.
Kids of clients, yeah. And are they generally enthusiastic?
We do it here through our club. But like, as a guide, I wouldn't. Occasionally you'd be asked, but it'd be the parents who would be doing it. But the parents would be fishing as well, nearly 90% of the time. The local club here does do a lot for youth angling. So you can encourage them that way without it. And I get what you're saying. Encouraging is one thing, forcing is something completely different.
Yeah, because you can't do it. You can't
do it.
No, you can't do it. No,
you can't do it. And it's a fine line. I mean, what do you do? It's a fine line. But I often say this. It's part of the broader probably problem that angling is facing. But there's so many things that you can do now as a youngster in the outdoors. People say, "Oh, they're all on computer screens." No, they're not. They're kayaking, they're mountain biking. Like I don't know. Like I grew up here rurally, and I've said it here before. the options I had when I was growing up here in Cornamona was I played football, Gaelic football, or I went fishing.
Yeah.
Now, as I said, there's mountain biking, there's kayaking, there's so many other things to do. So, like, for want of a better word, we're actually in competition.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because like my nephew and nieces in Dublin, like my nephew, like he's a mad hurler, and now he's actually started to play rugby. So he's always out and about, and before that it was soccer, and then Gaelic football. So he always went out, and his sisters, one does and one doesn't. One's sporty, one's not. But they always had the option to do it. But in Irish culture, you've got this kind of the GAA. You got that, and you've got so many lakes and rivers that are around you. Like everybody I know is next to a lake or a river. But here in the UK, it's not that. Like my nearest river is about 1.5 miles away, and I'm not allowed to fish it. And I can walk it, but I can't fish it. So if you're a young person and you walk to that river and you don't get, you don't even know what's in there. You don't see anybody engaging with it in the way you see the beauty of it. But actually, when you realize that there's a fish in it, it becomes something else. So that opportunity isn't there. But I can see when I go back to Ireland, like I was just back a few weeks back in County Meath, and one of the little rivers that flows into the Boyne. I mean, oh my gosh! I mean, it was just teeming with trout, and I was like, oh, got to get back there, and it's two fields from the back of my mate's house, and he wants to learn how to fly fish, so he can take his daughter there. And I mean, you live in the countryside and you've got these things on your doorstep, but what do you do then if you're living in the city? Do you have the same options then if you're living in the countryside? I'm not sure. Like I work with some people who help charities. They work with young kids. So one of my mates, he works with young kids, and he takes them. I think it's called Band of Brothers, and he takes them out. Takes young kids from urban and disadvantaged backgrounds into nature. And we have a thing here. It's relatively tackling mines. So something that's started here, which is about, which is a really good setup. A bunch of lads who I think Ricky Hatton is one of the sponsors of it, and they basically deal with mental health issues through fishing, and that's for kind of all age groups, but mostly it seems to be sort of mostly kind of men, but I might be wrong about that. But there are organizations that help young kids, but I'm just thinking I'm still worried about it. Like I'm kind of lucky, my wife and I, we have a caravan down the Bluebell Woods in East Sussex, and very close to the sea, but also very close to some very nice slow rivers full of tench and bream. And I go down there, but my daughter's more interested in swimming in them than she is in fishing. But that's fine, because sooner or later a pike will swim by and she'll be going, "What the hell's that?"
And you're like, "Get out of the way! I need to catch it.
I want to catch it."
Garrett, I have two questions there for you. I want to bring you back just to the magazine, and you mentioned Chris Yates. I'm a massive Chris Yates fan as well. How did you get him on board? And you must have been thrilled when he started writing for Fallon's Anger.
It was unbelievable. It's a pleasure to know the man. It really is. I always wanted him on board because that summer that I spent at home happened to coincide with a passion for angling on television, and I remember my dad coming and get me, and he said, "Watch these two lads. Come in. These two lads are amazing." And so we sat down and watched it, and I used to come down and watch with them, every sort of week. And I thought, and then I was reading his books, and I thought, what a writer is he? And so when the idea came to me, I said, look, I want this guy in it, And I spoke with Tom Ford, and Tom Ford, I knew that they'd known each other. And Tom Ford said, well, if you get a chance to meet him, you can tell him that I said hello, And I think he actually might have given me his telephone number. But I, being the person that I am, it's very rude to call somebody up without having proper permission. So it was when the Lost Diaries got launched in Rough Trade in London. I went along to the talk there. John Andrews interviewed Chris, and I bought a book, and I queued up at the end to get a signature. And while I was there, I said, Tom Ford said to say hello. I'm Garrett. I'm thinking of launching a fishing magazine. It's about the soul of nature. It's the soul of angling. It's about, fishing, and and it's not about the size of the fish. It's about the story behind the catching of the fish, and it's the quality of the story, and not about the quality of the fish, so to speak. But and he just went, sounds interesting. Here's my number. And I went, well, actually, I think I might already have that.
I know you where you live.
yeah. So I said, here's my number. You have permission to use it. So I called him about, I sort of, I paced up and down the hallway for, a number of days, kind of going, do I call? Is it too soon? It was a bit like sort of, those moments when you met somebody you fancy at a sort of party years before, and is it too soon to call them? But actually, I left it about a week, and then I called him back, and we had a long chat, and and he's been on board ever since.
Yeah, it's one of the highlights, I have to say, every time pick it up. Like I kind of flick straight to, no offense, I flick straight to Chris Yates.
yeah. Well, it's amazing, and like I remember the first time I fished with him, and I just couldn't believe it, and then when he came down for opening day of the season a few years back to the caravan, actually, and so we spent sort of 2 or 3 days together with Kev, Parr, and a few other lads, and it was just absolutely hilarious. He's very good at frisbee. I mean, he's devilish at frisbee, and obviously brilliant at angling. But
and tea making, isn't it?
Tea making, yeah. I think that's what I'm not a big tea man. I prefer a pint of Guinness, but obviously I don't drink when I'm on the bank. But I do like a coffee. But Chris takes the mickey out of me there. But his tea is fantastic, and he's got a kind of, he's got a very particular way of making it. But the way that he looks at things is remarkable. I've never met anybody like him. He has this perception. He's extremely close to nature. I mean, it's like, I don't know whether have you read his book Night Walk?
Yes, yeah.
I mean,
and it's funny, actually. I kind of, before I even picked it up, I was like, oh, he's going to struggle. How can you get a book out of that? And it was just
breathtaking, just absolutely breathtaking. And to see him do that, and when you're fishing with him, you just kind of, you'll have these moments where something's going to happen in a minute, and it does, or he'll see something and he goes, look over there, and you'll see over there, and you'll see a hobby. Like, I think the first time I fished with him, I was driving to show him the river, literally just the night before. This is the 15th of June. We were literally just going to see the river where we were fishing in the morning. And we're going through this windy country lanes, and he goes, stop the car. I'm like, what's going on? And he bolted out of the car, and he literally hurled this kind of gate, and he went, and he got his binoculars out. He went, oh, that was a Marsh Harrier. And Kev Parr was there, and he was like, really? And Kev just knows not to question Chris at all. We said, if Chris says he saw a Marsh Harrier, he definitely saw one. And we drove on down, and we literally about 2 miles on, probably only about a mile further on, but around quite a few bends, and we got to the bridge where we were going to fish, and we got it, and Chris was going, that's a really good sign to have seen a Marsh Harrier on the 15th of June. It's a really good sign. And then I was showing him the river, and Kev had the binoculars pointed in the other direction. He says, Chris, come and have a look at this. And it was a Marsh Harrier sitting on a fence post about 150 yards away. And it was there for the whole 3 or 4 days that we were there, flying up and down, quartering away. And Chris had seen it, through a gap in the trees, at me bombing along country roads. And I don't know how he did it. He kind of sensed that it would be there. He knew the country, he was returning to a part of the countryside he hadn't been to in 50 years. Yeah, he could kind of saw by the nature of the countryside, by its shape, that actually this was where I'm likely to see one. And it was almost like he conjured it out of thin air, in a similar way that he conjures fish.
yeah, exactly. Last question. We've kept you long enough, Garrett. We asked this for every guest on the podcast, and actually, my apologies, I didn't give you the heads up, so I've put you on the spot now with this one. What was your most memorable fish?
Oh,
And we always say it doesn't have to be the biggest, just memorable in terms of context, situation.
Yeah, it wouldn't be, it wouldn't, the biggest was the 270 pound, 260 pound sturgeon, but no, it wasn't that one. I think the most memorable one was the 25 pound pike I caught at, where was it? It was in the Meath Cavan border. I can't remember the name of the lake. It'll come to me. But yeah, it was a January day. It was 2 days before my dad died, and it was a friend of mine, Phil Daly. I was working in Navan, and he said to me, "Do you fancy going pike fishing? I got to go down and service this bit of hospital equipment, and then the lake is only up the road when we go there." And I said, "Yeah, great idea." And then he picked me up with the car, and then we got to the end of the road, and it said, "Oh, I forgot my camera. Have you brought yours?" And went, "No, I don't have a camera." I said, "Well, it's a horrible old day, cold January day. We probably won't catch anything anyway." And we went down to this lake, and I waited in the car park while he sorted his work out and drove off. And I was fishing with this Shakespeare strike rod, this old float rod, about 11-foot float rod. It was about as thick as a telegraph pole. It was a massive thing, but it was great for pike fishing because it was very strong. And I'd nicked my dad's Mitchell reel, and I was using that. And I was fishing whole mackerel on a treble and enough tonic, and it was really windy. There was just left to right wind going, and I hoofed this thing out, and the line just got caught. I was aiming for this bit of reeds between a sort of island and the shore, where I thought fodder fish might be sort of gathering up, and the pike could be in there. But the wind just took the line right out, about 25 yards away from where I was casting, and I couldn't get the bobbin on the optonic to sort of settle, and it was just going beep 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 like that. And my mate was going like, "That's a fish." And I said, "It's not a fish, it's the wind." And there's a huge bow in the line. I said, "It's a fish." And I was, "That's not. Really, it's not." And we went on with this for a minute or so, and I went, "Oh," he went, "We just strike the bloody thing." I went, "Okay," and it struck. And the water just went mental, literally where I'd cast. And this huge fish came out of the water, and I was just like, holy moly. And so I struck into it, and the pike took off along the bank. And within about a minute, the drag on the reel broke on my dad's good old, 50-year-old Mitchell reel. So I had to backwind this pike, and then it started absolutely showering down with rain. And it was like it wasn't light rain, it wasn't like a soft day rain. It was like lashing with rain, and the kind of stuff that hurts you. And Phil said, "Well, sod this, I'm off to the car," right? And he left me. So I was like, went up and down this thing, and I remember exactly the time, because it took me 25 minutes to land it. And just as I was landing it, the rain stopped, and Phil came out, and he netted the fish for me. And we waited, and I think it was 25.4 or 25.6 or whatever. And it was beautiful, biggest pike I'd ever caught. The biggest one I caught for that was about 16. And I said, "Jesus, it's a shame about that camera, wasn't it?" And we were just putting the thing back and going, and the fish, there was a little drop off in the lake, and she just sort of settled off at the bottom of the drop off and sat there for about 5 minutes, kind of looking at us with this kind of funny eye, looking at us a bit unhappy, and kind of saying, "What was all that about?" And then it just, off she went. And with that, we heard this sort of the cattle grid in the car park behind us go, and it was this big 4x4 came in, and this guy came out with this huge camera on his back, and he was there to photograph the birds, and he kind of rocks up and he goes, "You're fishing, are you?" It's just like, this is shite weather. What are you doing? Like, you never get down. And so I got home that night, and I called my dad, and I told him about it, and he wrote it down on a message, and he went off to dinner that night, and 2 days later we got the phone call that he'd passed away. But when I went home to spend some time with mum and funeral and stuff like that, I found the phone message written, and it had 25 pound pike, mackerel deadbait, and my friend who we'd seen for dinner had said that how proud he was because that was the biggest fish that a Fallon had ever caught. So the biggest pike that a Fallon had ever caught, should I say. So that's my best fish.
Wow, understandable. That's a memorable fish, memorable story, memorable context, everything.
That's all about, isn't it? Memorable stories.
Exactly. Like, and we've got some collection of them over the last few months as well. But Garrett Fallon, continued success with Fallon's Angler, the quarterly magazine. If anybody's interested in finding out more and maybe subscribing to it, and they can purchase single issues as well, where do they go?
Yeah, fallonsangler.net. And it's all on there. Yeah. fallonsangler.net/shop, and you'll see it all. And you go, by all means, if you want to know what we have a YouTube channel as well under Fallon's Angler. And we've just got a new film out called The Lost River, which is about micro spinning for trout on a little chalk stream. But that YouTube channel is a good introduction to the kind of thinking that that's behind who we are. My picture editor, Nick Fallon Cooper, who also makes our wonderful films, he's very much part of the team, as is Kev Parr, my deputy editor. And Kev, obviously, his writing too. Without those two, Fallon's wouldn't exist. So it's very much a team effort. It's got it might have, I've never looked at it as really having my name on the front cover. It's really about, it's my family name. It's my uncle, it's my father, it's my grandfather, Kevin Parr and Nick Phil Cooper are, hugely important to it.
Well, I think, you described it as the soul of angling. And I think, if anything, your life and what your dad passed on to you as well is, I think, very much summed up by that as well, in terms of, angling as a journey, throughout life. So continued success, and thanks again for joining us.
Thank you very much, lads.
Our thanks to Garrett Fallon for joining us on the show. And don't forget to rate, review, and follow the Ireland on the Fly podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from.
Plus, you can keep up to date on IrelandOnTheFly.com, as well as on Instagram. And myself and Tom will be back with another episode about the people and places of fly fishing in Ireland.